Welcome to Father Matt's Bible Studies and Sermons podcast. My name is Matthew Mead. I'm the priest and rector at the Parish of Christ the Redeemer in Pelham, New York. In today's Bible study, we continue reading the Gospel according to St. John. I hope you enjoy the Bible study. God bless, and have a great day. And don't forget to go to our YouTube channel and like and subscribe to us. God bless. Have a great day. Let us pray. Almighty God, we ask your blessing today as we continue our Bible study on the Gospel of St. John. Send your Holy Spirit, the Paraclete and Advocate, to be with us as we continue reading, marking, learning, inwardly digesting this scripture. All this we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Right.
Okay, we are in, I think it's chapter, let me double check on this, 16 of John, and I will share my screen, but as a reminder, we are in a very long section post Last Supper. They're on their way to the garden where Jesus will be betrayed, and this section is, I would argue this section is thought about in a good way if you think of it like little sermons or something like that. It doesn't always agree with itself if you read it in one big chunk. But so today, as we jump into this, one of the things to remember is early in the gospel, it was not always clear if we're in Jesus' time, as in like, you know, it's actually being narrated in Jesus' time right before his crucifixion and it's Jesus speaking, or if it's decades later and it's the evangelist recording Jesus and presenting it in a way that makes a lot of sense to the disciples generations later and the problems that they're going through in the early church. That's one way to think about what we're dealing with today. Jump in, see what we can get. Okay. All right. What is Zoom trying to do? Interesting. All right. James, you are at the top of the list, which I don't know if you got here first, but you're at the top of
I
my list.
did.
So can you see my screen? Can you see
Yes.
okay. Can you read this section where it, yeah, this section. So sorrow will turn to joy.
Right. Sorrow will turn to joy. A little while, and you will no longer see me. And again, a little while, and you will see me. Then some of his disciples said to one another, what does he mean by saying to us, a little while, and you will no longer see me? And again, a little while, and you will see me. And because I am going to the Father, they said, what does he mean by this a little while? We do not know what he is talking about. Jesus knew that they wanted to ask him. So he said to them, are you discussing among yourselves what I meant when I said a little while and you will no longer see me? And again, a little while and you will see me? Very truly, I tell you, you will weep and mourn, but the world will rejoice. You will have pain, but your pain will turn into joy. When a woman is in labor, she has pain because her hour has come. But when her child is born, she no longer remembers the anguish because of the joy of having brought a human being into the world. So you have pain now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you. On that day, you will ask nothing of me. Very truly, I tell you, if you ask anything of the Father in my name, he will give it to you. Until now, you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, so that your joy may be complete.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think this is fairly clear. I would suggest that one good way of thinking about, well, in the immediate sort of Jesus time, it's kind of obvious. I think that he's talking about I'm going to be taken away from you and crucified. And you'll no longer see me, and that sort of thing. And they're confused, and he's addressing that. And he'll come back in the resurrection, and then we're going to get more about the Holy Spirit in a little bit. But if you go into kind of early church time, when the gospel is, written, and people are reading it then, it's I think that this is sort of a setup to what we're going to read in the next section about what life as a disciple in the early church may have been like. And the other thing I'll say here is John doesn't give us many parables. He sometimes gives examples. Last week we read the vine with the branches. This kind of fits into that, right? This is a fairly obvious example of, well, there's pain now in terms of when a woman is in labor, but when the child is born, she forgets about that. And having not gone through that, I'm not exactly sure if the example is completely perfect, but there you go. He's going to say in the next section something about figures. And in John, it's referred to, parables or examples are sometimes referred to as figures of speech or figures and that sort of thing. But the disciples have pain now, but eventually they will have joy. That's my read on this. Any comments or questions about this section? All right, let's keep going then. Who's next on my list? Well, who hasn't read in a long time? Does anybody want to read before I pick somebody? All right, I'll just pick. Patrice, you're next on my list. Just going down. I don't know what your order is, but this is my order.
Thank you for acknowledging you've never had a child.
Well, I have a child. I have two.
Never physically had the child.
Right. Well, yes. Anyway, it's a figure of speech. So keep going.
All right. Are we ready? I have said these things to you in figures of speech. The hour is coming when I will no longer speak to you in figures, but will tell you plainly of the Father. On that day you will ask in my name. I do not say to you that I will ask the Father on your behalf, for the Father himself loves you because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and have come into the world. Again, I am leaving the world and am going to the Father. His disciples said, yes, now you are speaking plainly, not in any figure of speech. Now we know that you know all things and do not need to have anyone question you. By this we believe that you came from God. Jesus answered them, do you now believe? The hour is coming, indeed it has come, when you will be scattered, each one to his home, and you will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. I have said this to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you face persecution, but take courage. I have conquered the world.
All right. So we've continued moving forward on this, and I just find this the back and forth I find always kind of interesting in terms of like the disciples all of a sudden are like, oh, we totally get exactly what you're talking about. And I'm not sure they do. But again, it's a lot of the same stuff we've been reading with the world. If you remember from last time, there was a lot of anti-world stuff, but it's not as negative here as it was last week. And again, we get the hour is coming, and it has come. It's very difficult in terms of exactly how to deal with the timeline on all of this. But I think it's somewhat clear, and I don't have any huge comments on this section. Anybody have any thoughts on it or want to share anything?
I think it makes a big difference if you think about it's being written as Jesus was dying or 20 years later. I think that's a whole different perspective. They know what happened. Now it's obvious to them, and so they can write it one way as opposed to, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. What's going to happen tomorrow? You got to tell me what's going to happen tomorrow. So it's interesting to think of it in two different time frames.
Yeah, that can be difficult to juggle, but I think throughout the gospel, John in particular, it can be very helpful to think about it in terms of those two time frames. Like, this is for us, this is back then. And I think it's written in that way where it's really difficult to figure out which timeline you're in at any given time. But I think the primary timeline of the gospel is we all know this whole story. And so it's being told in a way that the reader already knows what's going on. And the disciples, back then are, yeah, it's what you said, I think. Yeah. Any others?
I think I always took it literally. And, that's how it was presented to me. Take it literally. This is actually what happened. Now, not so much.
Well, yeah, it's both. I mean, it's how you tell a story, right? Like if you think of it from that perspective, it's how you tell a story. And you tell a story with the all of the history and background that has led you to that point. Obviously, it's different from a sermon nowadays. 2,000 years later, you get a lot more, noise for the preacher's personal noise, whereas this is it's probably not 20 years. It's probably more like 40 or 50 for what that's worth. So a lot of the history of you're not talking just about Jesus went through this and the disciples didn't understand and then they came back together and they got through that struggle. You're also including in any struggles that they've had for the last 50 years, which probably includes a gradual and particularly painful separation of the Christian community, which was Jewish, from the Jewish community, and exiting the synagogues and that sort of thing. So there was, and a lot of that kind of falls into this. Any other thoughts?
So
Well,
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, JD.
No, go ahead.
Well, I mean, so in light of that, in the passage that we read before, not Patrice's, but the one before, when it says, ask in my name, obviously Jesus Christ's name, and it will be given to you. And now they've gone through 40. This is one of the things that's always confused me. They've gone through 40 or 50 years. And I'm sure they've asked for things. They've been persecuted. They've been poor. That, I mean, poor is fine, but starving. And they've seen people that are even in worse straits than they are. They've asked and they necessarily haven't been given. So now they're saying this. Like, how does this fit in?
I don't have a good answer on that. I mean, in terms of the all your prayers will be completed and that kind of thing, right? Is that sort of what you're asking? Like,
yeah, I mean, clearly not. I mean, we all know that, but what are they saying here?
Well, an example that's in this line of thought is also in the synoptic gospels. When I hear this, I usually jump to, your prayers can move mountains, right? If you remember that example. And I think that one way of thinking about it here is that it could be addressing that they are not living as sort of pure a faith as 50 years later as the evangelists would like them to. And so they need to constantly go back to asking for things, specifically and being Jesus centric, I think is one way of dealing with that. But I've struggled, I think, is maybe one, ask anything of the Father in my name and he will give it to you. What is the definition of anything, I guess? Like, what are you looking for there? And what is the hope to ask? And I don't have a good answer on that. So I'm glad you highlighted it.
Seems like until now you've not asked for anything in my name is a way to say to those who are listening, or you have to pull Jesus into it. It can't just be straight to God. So this to me seems like, I don't know, maybe just a reminder that Jesus is the important piece of it. I'm not sure. It's just
Well,
confusing.
yeah, no, I think that's true. I also think that one of the things that we've seen throughout this is, where's the thing about the Father? Was it right there? It is your direct connection to the Father is Jesus,
Yeah.
and you know how, and we'll see in the next chapter. There's a prayer to the Father which looks like an expansion in some way of the Lord's Prayer, and um, so I think I don't have a great answer on that. This is one of those things where, uh, again, my mind goes back to the moving mountains. Like, if with prayer you can accomplish anything, and that seems challenging to accept when, if especially if you're in a position where you've said a lot of prayers and the hopes that you have, and they seem perfectly fine, right? Like every now and then people will be like, well, you're praying for the wrong thing. It's like, that's only so helpful. And you're still not receiving what you ask.
Right.
So I think it's, from the perspective of this, is what is the definition of anything, and what is the definition of joy, right? Like you're asking anything, I guess it has to be the right thing. And when you receive, your joy will be complete. What does that look like in the context of a Christian community where they're being separated from, uh, you know, they have been taken out of the synagogues in some way. I mean, it's not like there was rampant persecution or anything like that, but there was some, and you have a situation where the leaders of the church are, you know, trying to promote this message of love, and it's not being received. That can be challenging when you have, well, we are asking for people to receive this and they're not. And then you go back into the gospel and you say, well, that actually looks exactly, the world wasn't listening. And so it brings you back into this, us against the world against us kind of thing. But yeah, I don't have a great answer on that. Spinning my wheels a little bit on that.
So I have a question. As we go through, you're saying like everybody knows, like what's going to happen, like the reader, but that's all of us today. 40 or 50 years ago, when he's writing this, it's going to, like, it goes out. The whole world doesn't know what the story is, like what has happened, right? And he's not writing for the Bible, right? He's writing his part. It's not like, and when you get it, you haven't read Matthew, Mark, Luke before, because everything's not been put together yet, right? So he's writing, and if you're part of the Christian community, yes, you know the story. But if you're someone who, like, say the days, like, just thinking, like, pass it forward, like when the missionaries went out and you hand it to somebody, they don't know the story. So you're reading, like, you don't know what's coming next, right? So as he's written it, there is still a mystery going forward for quite a number of people, right?
Yes, and maybe no, all at the same time.
Who's it written for?
Who's it written for is a great question. I am of the opinion. We talked a little bit about this last couple of weeks ago when we dealt with the Last Supper, and how in John, in particular, and this is not just the Last Supper, but the example in the Last Supper is pretty big. You, the Christian reader, is expecting in the Last Supper for this is my body, this is my blood, right? You, the Christian reader, were probably surprised in chapter 6 when all of that language was overtly there in the feeding of the 5,000. If you eat my flesh and that sort of thing. It's not clear if a reader of this that was a Christian would know the basic Matthew, Mark, Luke story. I think they probably did. Maybe not in the exact form that we have, but I think that they probably knew the timeline and the story. And it does bring up the question of, so who is Mark written for? Who is Luke written for? Who is Matthew written for? And each one of those takes a basic timeline and seems to present, hey, you don't know anything about Jesus. Here's the timeline. Here's some of the teaching. And let's say that's Mark. And then Mark ends with the empty tomb. And, later, probably almost definitely later, somebody tacks on a kind of compilation of resurrection appearances at the end of Mark, because it's like, well, that's not a satisfying ending for somebody who doesn't know the story, right? So we need to have more, because if the ending is just the empty tomb in Mark, you have somebody who doesn't know the story saying, well, what does that mean? And it opens up the door for the Christian missionary to be like, well, there was the resurrection and the community has come and all of this. Matthew and Luke fill in more gaps. They have each has a birth narrative. Each has very overt resurrection narratives. And again, if you look at one of my favorite passages in Mark and in Luke, you have that scene where the friends of the guy that is not able to walk, he's on the mat, he's extremely crippled, that sort of thing. They can't get into the house. There's too many people there. And I love the scene. They go up on the roof and they lower the guy through the roof, right? And Jesus heals him. There's an interesting difference between Mark and Luke in how it's narrated. In Mark, they kind of rip up the top of the roof, which would be familiar to somebody who is in an area where it's more like a thatched roof. In Luke, they pull up the tiles, which would be more familiar to somebody who is in kind of a Greek-speaking, more city-like area. And which gives you a clue that the gospel is written for people in different areas. Each gospel is written for people in different areas, but I think Matthew, Mark, and Luke are primarily written as evangelistic tools for people that have never heard the story, right? It gives you the full story. John does not give you the full story. John gives you the full story on a different level, and there's a lot of things that are missing from it that you're like, how is this not in here? And I think John is written, this is just me, I think John is far more written for the Christian community that is going through their own stuff rather than as an evangelism tool for outsiders, for what that's worth. So I think this gospel is, and this whole section in particular, because frankly, it's not readable if you're trying to, chapters 14, 15, 16, and 17 is not a particularly solid, good evangelism tool to be like, and then Jesus talked for chapters on end, and it's all disagreeing with itself, as opposed to the Sermon on the Mount, which is a couple of chapters, but it's like home run after home run after home run of stuff that people can easily grasp and be like, oh, okay, so that's what Jesus was about. Whereas this is like, it's all about living as a disciple and you against the world and how that's going to play out. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think in John, it's helpful to think of those two timelines, the Jesus timeline and the disciples timeline. And it feels to me, as I read through this, that a lot more of this gospel is about, well, you already know the story. Let's expand on it and elaborate it a little bit. You already know that story. You've already been converted. What does it mean to be a disciple now who's struggling and that sort of thing? What does it mean to be somebody that's part of this community? What is your relation to the rest of the world? How do you treat other Christians? This gospel feels to me more like a mix of the Jesus story with a lot of what is in the epistles from Paul. I mean, it's not exactly from Paul, but it's how do you as a Christian behave now? Paul doesn't write the story of Jesus, and his letters probably come out before any of these gospels are in the form that we have them now. But he assumes everybody knows the basic story. And he's trying to tell Christians how to behave in Christian contexts and communities and how to deal with the world and that sort of thing. And I think John has a lot of that as well. All right. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. All right. Chapter 17. Well, and I will say one thing. You know, in the world, you face persecution, but take courage. I have conquered the world. Did we read this already? I think we did. Did we? I went backwards, so now I'm confused. I think we read this, right? Did we say this? Yeah, the figures. We read
Yes.
Okay. Again, you do get in the other gospels this idea that you're going to be persecuted, but it comes across much more heavily, I think, throughout John as sermons by Jesus presented to a Christian community 50 years later that is trying to understand what does it really mean when Jesus says, this is my body and this is my blood, and it's moved into a different section of the gospel so that you're not just attaching it anymore to the event of the Last Supper. You're taking it in a different context. Again, another example in John. John has a different Holy Week timeline by a day. In John, well, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Last Supper, right, which is what we're in right now, is a Passover meal. Very overtly, it's a Passover meal. In John, everything is one day later. And Jesus is crucified at the exact time that the Passover lambs would be slaughtered. And so if you're reading this, you're like, wait a second, I thought that it was, why is he telling this story with a different timeline? And then you get to the point where the lambs are being Passover sacrificed, and you think, oh, I begin to get it. There's a deeper connection about who Jesus is and how Christians are supposed to understand Jesus, as opposed to simply telling non-Christians, here's the timeline, here's what he said, this is what he did. And John is much kind of, I think, more written for the Christian community at the time. They all are, but I think John really specifically is. All right. I think Melissa is next on my list. Melissa, are you there? You're blacked out, but are you
Oh, am I? Yeah, I don't know where I am.
you're
There I-
videoed out, but that's okay. You don't can you read I gotta see how long this is. I think the whole chapter is one chunk, and yeah, Melissa, you get to read the whole chapter, and as before you read, I mentioned it briefly. One of the things that we don't get in John's gospel, we get it in Matthew and we get it in Mark, is the Lord's Prayer. Interestingly, you don't get that in Mark's gospel. So you get it in Matthew and Luke. You don't get it in Mark, and you don't get it in John. But in John, you get something as we read through this that has bits of the Lord's Prayer in it. So as we read through this, one thing to think about is this is sort of John's Lord's Prayer. So, all right, Melissa, fire it up. Go from start to finish the chapter.
After Jesus had spoken these words, he looked up to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, so that the Son may glorify you, since you have given him authority over all people, to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. And this is eternal life, that you may know the only true God and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. I glorified you on earth by finishing the work that you gave me to do. So now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had in your presence before the world existed. I have made your name known to those whom you gave me from the world. They were yours, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know everything you have given me is from you. For the words that you gave to me, I have given to them, and they have received them and know in truth that I came from you, and they have believed that you sent me. I am asking on their behalf. I am not asking on behalf of the world, but on behalf of those whom you gave me, because they are yours. All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them. And now I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them in your name that you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them in your name that you have given me. I guarded them, and not one of them was lost, except the one destined to be lost, so that the scripture might be fulfilled. But now I am coming to you, and I speak these things in the world so that they may have my joy made complete in themselves. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. I am not asking you to take them out of the world, but I ask you to protect them from the evil one. They do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sakes I sanctify myself, so that they also may be sanctified in truth. I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. As you, Father, are in me, and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one, as we are one, I in them, and you in me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I desire that those also whom you have given me may be with me where I am, to see my glory, which you have given me because you loved me from the foundation of the world. Righteous Father, the world does not know you, but I know you, and these know you, that you have sent me. I made your name known to them, and I will make it known, so that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them.
Great. Okay. This whole chapter is a prayer by Jesus. Oh, and as a slight aside, the next thing is after Jesus had spoken these words, he went out across the Kidron Valley, and we now jump into Holy Week, right? Or the betrayal of Jesus at the by Judas. But so this whole we were just talking about who is this for? This is a prayer by Jesus for his disciples. Which ones? Those that are there right then? Sure. Those that are 50 years later? Also yes, right? So it's both of them. So that they it's a prayer for both, I think. And I mentioned the Lord's Prayer. If you think of the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, we get that in this, right? Father in heaven. Hallowed be your name. We get that in this. Your kingdom come. We get that in this in some way. Your will be done on earth as in heaven. You're getting a lot of the same kind of themes. What you're not getting is give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. And there's another version of the Lord's Prayer, deliver us from the evil one. We got that pretty overtly in one part of this. Save us from the time of trial. What's the next part? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, be done on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses. We forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Thine is the kingdom.
Thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. It's basically all in here, but it's the difference in the Lord's Prayer is the Lord's Prayer in the other Gospels is a prayer said by disciples to God. This is a prayer said by Jesus to the Father about the disciples. And a lot of the themes and language that we've had throughout the whole Gospel pops back up into this. But one thing in particular is this business of the world. If you listen to the world as Melissa read it, the world hates them. They don't belong to the world. Jesus doesn't belong to the world. But then later, they've been sent into the world, and even later than that, you get there was something about they're basically an example of to the world about what the love is supposed to look like between this Christian community, and that's how they sort of convert the world. Uh, right here. Yeah, it's so that the world knows the Christian community is being used as the evangelistic tool more so than the story of Jesus is being used as the evangelistic tool. It's supposed to be, in this case, the way the Christians are acting and loving one another is the example of why Jesus is one with the Father, because they're all one with each other, and that's supposed to be the converting example. I want to say one other thing, because it's one of my favorite verses. If anybody ever asks you, what is the definition of eternal life? It's actually in John. Eternal life is this, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you've sent. That's an interesting definition of eternal life, but the definition of eternal life in John is that you know God through Jesus. That's it. Any thoughts on all of this? Five seconds. 4, 3. All right, no thoughts. Okay. We are done with the enormous discourse of John. And we're going now to the betrayal and arrest. So let's see how far we can get in this. Let's do this, and then we're in a new section. And when we start again next week, we'll be at Jesus's trial. Etta, you're next on my list. Can you read the betrayal and arrest of Jesus?
Sure. After Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas bought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priest and the Pharisees. And they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Who are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these people go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave to me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?"
Great. Okay. A couple of things.
Malchus?
Well, I'll talk about that in a second. Malchus, yes. I'll talk. So these notes, Z and all this other stuff. I am is the note Z rather than I am he. B, I am, and D we're going to see is I am as well. So first, we've had throughout the gospel a bunch of, they're called ego eimi because ego is I and eimi is I am. So it's I am in Greek, and we've had a number of I am the good shepherd, I am the vine, I am the bread of life, I am the living water. Throughout the gospel, I think there's 7 of them that are I am something statements, and I think there's also 7, and by 7 I mean examples. Like he says, "I am the good shepherd, the gate." That's generally counted as 1, right? So there's 7 of those, and then there's 7 different scenes as well where Jesus specifically says, "I am," and that's a pretty clear reference if you know Exodus and the story of Moses. And the burning bush. It's, Moses says, "Who am I supposed to say that sent me?" when they ask, and God says, "Tell them I am." Right. So that there's a reference there throughout this. And our translation, this is why the translations are kind of annoying. In English, Jesus replied, they answered, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus replied, whom are you looking for? They answered, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus replied, I am, period. That's what you're supposed to be seeing. In English, they put on the he because it reads better in English. So you lose the kind of jarring strikingness of it. And then there's this interesting thing, which looks a lot like Moses in some way, right? When God says that, you're on holy ground in this, Moses falls back and falls on the ground. And one of the things that happens here is if you can envision this, the police and all this other group and the soldiers, they're there, and Jesus says, I am, and they kind of get blown back and fall to the ground because they're in the presence of God. It doesn't read, overtly like that, but that's probably what's going on here. The other thing is, did anybody notice that it's never called Gethsemane in this?
No, but I did notice he put the ear back on.
Say that again?
He didn't put the ear back on.
Okay, well, that's a good, so, and somebody said Malchus earlier, right? So we'll talk
Right.
Malchus, he cut it off, he doesn't put it back on.
Right.
When we think of the gospel narrative, we're taking from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and combining them, and sometimes Paul too, and combining the story into one unified story. So in John, it's not called Gethsemane. It's and for those of you, enough people on this call have been to Israel and Jerusalem. If you remember Jerusalem, the city, the old city, and then across, if you're on the Temple Mount, or just outside the city on the Temple Mount side, there's a giant cemetery. Does that ring a bell? There's a huge cemetery in a valley where there's monuments to, old kings and that sort of thing. That's the Kidron Valley. And across from it, the modern church of the where the modern church is in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's the garden across the Kidron Valley, right? It makes it seem like they were coming from Jerusalem to the garden from this perspective, right? They go across the Kidron Valley, down across the graveyard. It probably was there at that time too, because I think it goes back something like 5,000 years. So across that, and then they're in the garden on the other side on the Mount of Olives. And it's not called Gethsemane, but it gives you a reference point that the other Gospels don't give you. The other Gospels talk about the Mount of Olives and the Garden of and Gethsemane. And I don't think, I could be wrong, I don't think the other Gospels refer to it as a garden. So what we do is we combine them. The Garden of Gethsemane is across the Kidron Valley, though John is only saying there's a garden across the Kidron Valley, and the other evangelists are only saying Gethsemane, which is on the Mount of Olives. So you kind of combine all of them. The scene with Malchus, this is the only gospel where he's named. That's interesting of itself. If you remember, we don't get this in John's gospel. There's another difference that we'll deal with later. But do you remember who helps Jesus carry the cross? Anybody remember his name?
Hmm.
No.
Simon of Cyrene, right?
Yes.
Simon of Cyrene. I think it's Mark's gospel who adds a detail that's kind of so odd. He'll say, Simon from Cyrene helped Jesus carry the cross. He's the father of Rufus and Marcus or something like that. And it's like, why the heck are his kids named? Like, and why is Malchus named? I think what most scholars will probably tell you is the likelihood is that Malchus became a Christian. Simon of Cyrene's kids were named because they were known in the community. Like we got famous ancestors kind of thing, right? So Malchus is named because how on earth would they know his name was Malchus? Well, remember Malchus? He's the guy whose ear got cut off, right? The other thing that's unique is this is the only gospel that tells us it was Simon Peter, right? In the other gospels, it's one of the disciples took a sword I think it's Luke that story is, and cut his ear off, and Luke is the one where he puts it back on. It's not in Matthew, it's not in Mark, and it's not in John. So like each gospel has a different perspective on some of the details, and we generally combine all of them into a unified thing, which can be helpful, but is not always helpful. What's missing is in the Garden of Gethsemane, or in Gethsemane in the Synoptics. Do you remember Jesus? The disciples keep falling asleep, right? They're there for a while, and he goes off and prays, and they keep falling asleep. He prays a prayer in the garden that mentions in the Synoptics about drinking the cup, and it's to the Father. So you get the prayer in the last chapter to the Father, even though it's a little bit before they get there. And you also get a reference to the exact same language of the prayer about drinking the cup, and the hour has come and all this other stuff. So the details are all pretty much the same in each gospel, but they're telling it from different perspectives, which is kind of neat. Another thing in John, this is the last thing I'll say because we are done, but another thing in John's gospel is throughout, Jesus is in complete control of everything. And it's much more obvious in the Passion narrative starting here that Jesus is willingly giving himself. As I said earlier, when Jesus said to them, "I am," they stepped back and fell to the ground, right? That's not something that normally happens at an arrest, right? If somebody says, "Who are you looking for?" "It's me." The police tend not to step back and fall on the ground, right? This is very much Jesus is on a different playing field than the rest of them. Any comments or thoughts on this passage? All right. Well, next week we will continue with the trial of Jesus. Yeah, they take him away bound, and we go from there. All right. Good to see you all. God bless. Have a good week, and come to Evensong on two things. Come to Evensong on Sunday. It'll be nice. We have there should be actually a decent amount of kids there, because Father Vite is bringing his teenage kids, and my teenage son that's not in college is coming, and some others are coming. So come. Father Vite is a good guy. I've never heard him preach, so I also will be listening to see what he has to say. And we'll have some food after the service on Sunday at 5. So come to church in the morning too. But Evensong is a different thing, and different readings and good hymns and what have you. And the other thing is, I sent out probably to all of you an email. Come to the concert on October 9th. That's the other thing. All right. God bless. Have a good day, and I will see you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Father Matt's Bible Studies and Sermons podcast. If you want to learn more, you can visit our website at christchurchpelham.org. christchurchpelham.org. God bless and have a great day.